Hello and welcome to this series of Unity 2D tutorials. In this very first tutorial I'll cover how to make a character move. So if I press the play button right here, you can see that the character moves left and right and he walks. And this tutorial will be for pretty much anyone who's a beginner to Unity. I'll be using Unity 5.0, but this works in 4.5 and the earlier versions also. The buttons might be slightly, a little looking different, but more or less the content should still be the same. This is what we'll be creating in this first video. We're going to have the animator with the animations. We're going to have coding for this, and I'll explain how to use the Unity interface. So to begin with, let's make a new project. File, new project, and I'll be using, I guess let me cover over here first. So to get Unity, I assume you already have it, unity3d.com. We have the new version, version 5. You can click Get Unity and download it. We're also going to be using Playmaker for coding. So Playmaker over here is this area, it's this add-on third-party addition you can add to Unity. It doesn't come with it normally, but it creates a visual coding, as you can see here. So if you're not comfortable with creating line by line, typing out all your code, you can use the visual code language that Playmaker creates. So they have Unity here for free, but Playmaker does cost a little bit of money. You can see here that you can buy from the Asset Store or Playmaker Store. There is a 50% off discount for students though, which is great. So if you click on this, you can see that it's regularly $95, but if you go over here and type in the coupon, then you can use your student email also, and you'll get the discount, so it'd be around $45 or so. This requires 4.3, so this tutorial will cover how to use, how to code or do everything with Unity 4.3 and up. So if you're using 5, then that's what I'll be using for this video. So jumping back to Unity, we'll create a new project, and what it does is it'll put a new project on wherever I save it to. So I'll put it on the desktop, and I'll click 2D for this. So I'll create project. So if you're doing a 3D game, click 3D, 2D for 2D. And I'll create project. And not save the current one. And Unity does take a little bit, so it does run a little bit slow. It has a lot of power to it, so it is a bit slow on the computers. Alright, so now we've made a brand new project. If I were to press the play button right now, you'll see that nothing happens. It lights up blue, but since our scene is empty, we don't have anything. But there's no errors, so we know it's working. So the first thing, let's import the Playmaker code. So if you've purchased Playmaker, you can download it. I usually store it in the, let's see, the C drive. Version 4.5 that I have, dropped it in the x86 folder, but version 5 dropped it in the program files, the non-x86. So depending on where it gets dropped at. I have the Unity down there, editor, and I had standard packages. So I created this standard packages folder and dropped the Playmaker in there. So that's Playmaker, but I also have 2 more additions that we're going to want for doing our 2D stuff, and those can be found on the Playmaker website. If you go to Manual, and then go to Add-ons down here, I'm going to be using Mechanism Animator. This says for Unity 4, but if you click on it, you have the option for Unity 5 and 4.6. So you have both options here. I already downloaded for the 5.0, and then the other option is Unity Physics 2D. So we click on this one and go Playmaker Unity 2D for the package. So once you've downloaded those, and I've already dropped them in here, when you go over to Assets, Import Package, you can import a custom package, and then I have to go trace that back down again. So C drive, program. If you drop on the desktop, it'll probably be easier to find it. Standard packages, and I'm going to import the Playmaker. And this does take a little bit, depending on the speed of your computer. My computer is pretty quick, so it should be within a minute or two. Some computers might take 5 minutes or so. When it does load, you'll see that it has a window right here, and it asks you, do you want to import all these different things? And you can see it's new because you don't currently have it in your scene. There's nothing in the project. So I'm going to press import. And this will take a little while. Meanwhile, while it's loading, as you can see here, we have the game view. This is what you're going to see while you're playing the game. Over here we have the scene view, which won't work until that finishes uploading. We have the scene view, which I'll click on next, and then we have the animation tab, animator tab, and another scene view that I could probably close. And these windows I have open for Playmaker, but I haven't actually used Playmaker or imported into the scene, so it doesn't know to load yet. And then we have the project over here in the hierarchy. What the project is everything contained in your file. So from every level, every object, everything you've created. So now that I've imported Playmaker, it just dropped all these assets packages into our project folder. The hierarchy is basically what's in your scene. So at the scene at the moment, all we have is a camera, and that's what we're seeing right now is what's through this camera view, this blue background. So we have a camera in the scene, which is hierarchy, and project is every level, every object, every asset you have in your project. And you can rearrange these tabs. You can grab the hierarchy and you can pull it into the project. So they're over here next to each other, and that gives you a little more room. Or you can separate them and kind of customize it however you want to drop them on your screen, and they can go pretty much anywhere. All right, so with that being covered, let's grab in the last two. So import package, custom, and I'm going to grab the animator actions, open. What this does is it gives Playmaker some animator controllers, and the animator tab is right here. So I'm going to press import, and this will be a lot quicker because it's a smaller package. The Playmaker file does take a little while to import. And then let's go for the very last one, import package, custom package. We're going to want Unity 2D, physics. So this, it doesn't say physics on here, but that's what it is. It's the Unity 2D physics. So we're going to import this in here, and we're going to press import, and it should drop them all in here. So now we have our animator control panel options. We have the physics 2D, which is now dropping right in here. And because that was a version 4 Unity package, the other ones were Unity 5 version. This one's asking, do I want to upgrade and convert this package I imported to Unity 5? So I'm going to press OK. I already have a backup. This just means that it's going to change this, and I have an original copy somewhere else, because once this is changed, it's going to be constantly 5.0. So sure, I have another copy somewhere else. All right, so that brings everything else in here. And again, going back, this is the scene view. It looks like it's still converting. All right, there we go. All right, so this is the scene mode. So we can see the camera. I can click on the camera, so that's what the camera is seeing. Whereas this is the scene, everything we have in it. The animation tab will do animations in here, and we have the animator. And then I have another scene tab that I could probably close tab on. That's why I only have 3. All right, and if for some reason you don't have these, let's say I close this one by accident, you can go over here to Window, and you can pull them out. So I have the animator already open, but I don't have the animation, so I'm going to pull this one open. And I'm going to drag the animation tab right next to there, so I have animator, animation, and scene. So those are the 3 I'm going to use, and then these will be the Playmaker tabs when we get to the coding aspect. All right, so the scene should be all set up now. Now we can start building our game. All right, so the first step to building our game, we need to import our sprites. So I'm going to jump over here to a folder that I have, and this folder has multiple different sprites that I'll be using throughout the tutorials. The first thing I want to add, actually, I can either go assets, import new asset, and I can track down from the desktop. We have the sprites folder, and let's say I bring in the character walking. So I'll use this one first. I can press import, or I could try and grab multiple, but when you're doing this method, it only lets you, even if you're using Control or Shift, you can only grab one sprite at a time. So if I import left walking, import, it pops them in here. Now if I were to go to the folder, which is probably going to be quicker, I can grab, let's say, him standing, and I can grab a whole bunch of other ones. Let's say I'll grab ground and him standing. I'll drag both of these in here, and you can see that I can grab multiple. I can grab all of these and drag all of these in if I want to. So it's faster to drag them into the window right here than it is to go to import one at a time. So jumping back to here, I'm going to make a new folder real quick. So, and there's no folder option. Create folder. So if you click on the create button right here, you get the option for that. So I'm going to call this my sprites folder. Kind of keep things organized. And I'm going to grab the ground sprite and the walking and standing sprites and drop them in the folder. So now it keeps things organized. The sprites are in here. What we have is that Let's do the ground first because this will be easier. So we take the ground sprite, and I can either drag it into the window, or I can go to the hierarchy, and under hierarchy it has its own create little window. So create 2D object sprite. So it creates a sprite, and since this one was already selected when I did that, it automatically dropped it in there. Otherwise, if this wasn't selected and I did create 2D object sprite, it'll drop in an empty, or not empty, but a sprite that doesn't have an image attached to it. Since this one dropped in, it put the ground as the sprite using the sprite renderer, and this one right here, the sprite renderer has none for the sprite. So if I wanted to use it, this will be the image placeholder to kind of show you what's on the screen. So I'm going to grab for this one, actually, the left standing and the walking are sprite sequence, so it has a lot of images, so I don't want to use those. I need to break those apart first. So let's jump to the standing position. This is his idle position where he's breathing but not actually moving. So I'm going to take this one, and how this works for the bringing your sprites in, we have under the sprite, now that I'm selected on it in the project tab, we have single, which I'll click and you can see multiple. So since we have multiple images in here, I'm going to use multiple. Whereas the ground, if I click on this one, it has only one single image, so I can leave that on single. Alright, so let's go back to the standing position. I'll change this to multiple. And then if I go to sprite editor, what you see here is that we have this giant long sprite. Now I'm going to go to slice in this top left corner, and you can use automatic, which will basically cut out if you have like a large area. It'll just find every sprite and cut it out for you. So I could use that for this, but since I know that I drew it at a 128 by 128, I can click grid and type 128 by 128, and then when I press slice, it'll slice it up. And actually I think I drew it 127. I drew the walking at 128. Somehow I got cropped by a pixel, I guess. Alright, so if you notice now, see how it's nicely sliced between all the different frames? So that's how you would slice that, and you can specify other parameters if there's offsets or paddings or however that works. And you can go to pivot. Right now the pivot is set to the center of the character, but you can move the pivot to anywhere else. Alright, so also of note, notice how the character is very blurry. The reason he's so blurry is because this sprite is very, very large. If I check out the properties, the standing sprite is 3048 pixels by 128. So if he's 3048, the maximum size allowable is 2048. So I'm losing 1000 pixels. It's getting squashed, and because it's getting squashed, it's turning blurry. So to fix that, I'm going to go to set the 2048 to 4096, and because the maximum now is higher than the sprite itself, it'll upgrade the resolution. So let's press apply here to cut this, cut the frames or slices or sprites, and then 2048 already got applied. So let's open the sprite editor again, and now you should be able to see that he's not. Let's close that up, revert. Alright, let's apply this first. 4096, apply. Alright, and now we'll go to sprite editor, and now we take a look. And now you can see he has a much more pixely look, the original created pixel format that I made him at. If you wanted higher resolution sprites, you just draw them out higher res, but since I drew him at small Super Nintendo kind of sizes, he's going to be a little more pixelated. Alright, so let's close that back again. So once we have that set to 4096, he should be nice and clear, and he has all his sprites cut out. And if I click on his name, you can see every one of these images was now cut out, and he'll eventually start breathing as I keep clicking down there. Alright, so now I can go back to this one, and I can specify that I want the standing position, the first sprite, to be him. So he's my placeholder image, and I can leave him floating above here for now. Alright, so let's create an animation of the character. Now that we have a sprites in here. Alright, so to make the animation, let's go with, we'll select our first frame, and we'll select our last frame. So we've selected all the frames that we need, and from 0 to 23. We'll pull up the animation tab, and you have to click the character you want. Otherwise, if you try and drag this in here, it won't let you drag it. So, actually I should have named this guy first. Let's go back to the scene, click on the guy. He's called New Sprite 1. I'm going to call this character. Alright, so he's named character. He has the standing sprite as his sprite renderer, so we can see what he is. And then, so now, I didn't save. So press enter, confirm it. Alright, character. So now I go back to the animation tab. So now the character is selected. Now I can drag all of these. And one more thing, we also need to create a property. So I can click the record button and start creating this, or probably click the add property and it does the same thing. We need to make, I'll make a folder, I don't have to make a folder, but animations. So this is the animations folder that'll go inside of the project. And I'm going to call this one the idle animation. Alright, save. So now I have an idle animation. And now that I have an idle animation, I can take frame 0 to frame 23 and drag them in here, and they'll all pop in here. I want to change the sample from 60 frames per second to 30, which is more real-time HD, what most games and TVs play at. But you could try 60 frames per second if you want to. It'll just play a lot faster, and I didn't draw it at 60 frames. I drew it at 30 frames. Alright, so now we have this. You can scrub through the timeline and you can see what's happening. You can see him right here. As I'm sliding through here, it's kind of small. I should probably adjust the camera on that. But you can see that he's breathing. Alright, so once we have that, I'm going to click off of the record button so it's not recording anymore. It's got our sprites in there that we need. And then let's jump over to scene mode and click on the character. And notice that he now has an animator component. So these are components, and it was all automatically added to the character because we put animation on him. You can't put animation on a character that's inside of your project settings. It has to be added to a character here, unless you put the character in there, I suppose. But yeah, so make sure you clicked on here to start creating the sprites. So you're adding the animation frames to the sprite that's in your scene. Alright, so now we have this. Let's jump over to the animator tab. And what the animator tab is it shows all the different animations. So entry means the initial starting position. Any state we'll cover later. Take the idle, and you can see that from entry where it starts, there's a line that drops down to idle. And the idle is orange because that's our default state. So if I add one more animation in here, let's say, actually let's press play first. Let me jump to the scene mode, click on this main camera, and zoom this in a bit. The camera size is set to 5. I'm going to set this to something like 2. And you can see that it zooms in a lot more by changing the camera size. I'm also going to take the camera and move it up a bit so it centers a little better on him. So now I've moved the camera and I've set the size to something more visually noticeable. If I press play at this point, you can see that he's breathing. So perfect, he's going to keep breathing in a looping pattern. If I were to jump over to the animator tab, you can see that it's lighting up in blue because it's playing the animation. As soon as it finishes, it loops back again. So we have a looping animation at this point. Alright, let's pause the game. Also, he doesn't have any gravity yet or any collision, it's just playing the animation. So let's put the other animation in there now. So I'm going to go down here to the walking animation. And I haven't cut this one out yet, so it's still a single. So I'm going to go multiple. Set the sprite, actually let's set this to 4096 again, apply that, then go sprite editor, so now these should be nice and crisp and clean. Also you can see that he has a little bit gray around his eyes. It's running on compressed mode, so if I take compressed and go true color and apply that again and then zoom back in, you can see it has a lot more, there's no gray under the eyes. It cleaned that up because we're using true color now instead of using a compressed sprite. Alright, so again, slice, automatic grid, 128 by 128, slice, it slices them all up. Apply, close out that, and we should be good. And in the meantime, I'm going to jump back to this guy and set him to true color also, and press apply. Alright, so I can close out these, so I have both of those. Now I want to put this animation on the character. So I need to click the character to make him selected, then go over to idle, create new clip, and let's put this in the animations folder and call this walking. And then go over to the walking sprites. Scroll down to the very last one, hold shift and click the last one, drag these into the window, and boom, we have 30 frames, or however many that was, 31 frames. Change this, since I drew 30 frames per second, to 30. And if I were to press or scroll to the timeline, you can start to see that he is walking. And now if the camera zoomed in, it's easier to see that. So we have the character walking. Alright, and turn off the record so it doesn't light up red anymore. And now that we've added the walking animation, the animator now recognizes there's another animation attached to the character. So I have the idle, it says right here idle, and walking, and already named it for us. So we have idle and walking. Again, orange means the default state when it starts off. If I right click on this and set this as make layer default state, this turns orange because now this is the main animation. And if I were to press play, he'd be walking. And he'll keep walking and walking and walking because it's looping. So now let's right click, make transition, and I'll drag it to walking, and right click, make transition, and send it back. And you'll see that if I press play now, he'll walk, idle, walk, idle, walk, idle. So you can see it's switching back and forth. So when we get to the coding aspect, we're going to code which one occurs. But at the moment, you can see that it's transitioning between two different sprites. And I'll make idle the default. So let's make this make the default. And I can take these off if I want to and just go to delete the transitions. There we go. Press delete and delete. Cool. Alright, so now it's just back to the breathing state. Alright, close that out. And now that we have the animations all equipped to the character, the last thing is to code them. Actually, wait, we're going to do one more thing. Alright, so I'm going to click on the character, and now we're going to go add on the physics to the character. So we go to Add Component, and we're going to do Physics 2D. The Physics 2D, we're going to go add a rigid body, and the rigid body will create the gravity for us. So if I were to press play now, he'll drop right off the screen because now he has gravity. Also, we need to add gravity to the ground. So I'm going to click on this and name it ground. And this ground sprite needs a component also. It has a sprite renderer showing us the ground, but we need physics 2D, and I can pick multiple different ones. I can make it a circle collision, box collision, but I'm going to do edge collider. And if I click on edge collider, it'll put a line on our, in the scene mode we'll see it, the line that's the collision. Now in Unity 4, you'd have to hold the shift key and it'll give you the option to start putting dots in there, but in Unity 5 you would just click this button right here, and now it gives you editable ability. So you can see the dot that's floating around here. Again, in Unity 4 you would have to hold the shift key to get that dot. So I'm going to take this corner and pull that down to there. I'm going to click here and pull it up to there, and kind of match the ground contour a bit. Alright, so now I have this line that goes around here, and that's our collision line. I can click off there, turning off that, and so you have a collision line sitting on here. So if I were to press play now, he still doesn't have he has gravity, but he doesn't have collision. So we need to go put collision on the character now. So let's jump back to the character. So we have a rigid body which gives him gravity, add component, physics 2D. I'm going to put a circle collider on him. I'm going to zoom in, and the zoom is the scroll wheel. Holding Alt will give you the option for pan, but you can also just use the middle mouse button and click and press down that, basically the scroll wheel pushing down, and you get that. There's no 3D spin because we clicked on 2D in the beginning, so there's no need to spin around in 3D. Alright, so I'm going to take this circle collider and kind of arrange it to where I think the center should be. So I'm going to, oops, you can't just grab the circle collider, you have to grab the settings on it. Unless you click Edit Collider, and then you can grab the very edge and kind of shrink it into something that looks like collision. So we'll try that, and then I'm going to go to the offset. I'm going to pull the X over to center him a little better, and grab the Y and pull that down to somewhere around his feet level, and maybe make it a little bit smaller on the radius. Maybe a little bigger. Let's try 0.24. Alright, and then let's center a little more on the X. Alright, so that looks mostly centered, so it's not going to catch his feet or his hands or his sword, but it'll catch the rest of his body. And then I'm going to make his body taller, so let's go to Add Component, and I'm going to put one more, a box collider on the character, and do the same thing. So I'm going to take the X offset of, on the box collider, actually edit first. There we go, edit collider, pull this into the edge, pull this in, pull the bottom up halfway through the circle, and pull the top down. Oops, missed. And pull the top down somewhere on there. So it does. So he's not going to have any collision on his hair. If a bat or some kind of object hits his hair, it's not going to be a problem. If something hits his sword, it's not going to hurt him. If something hits the left side of him, it's not going to hurt him either. I could slide the collision over, but I'm trying to center it around his main body. And the reason I'm using a circle is that if you have a bunch of bumps on the ground, the very corner could catch and get stuck on those little bumps. But if you're using something round, he'll be able to roll over top of it, basically. Not necessarily roll, but slide over top of it easier because it's an angle rather than catching on every little corner. Alright, so now that I have the collision set up, I can, I guess, actually, let's uncheck the edit collider first to turn that off. Then I'll just shrink these down by clicking the minimize, so they're right there. So now he has collision, and if I press play at this point, he should drop down and collide and fall right over. And the reason he's falling over and just kind of laying on the ground is because he hit a circle bottom, and the circle is just rotating around because he has a top-heavy sprite that's falling over because we did a square on top of a circle. So let's pause that, and to fix the rotation, we're going to click on Fixed Angle, so check mark that box, and if I press play now, he'll drop, but he won't rotate. So now we have a sprite that's sitting on the ground. You can see the ground plane in the scene mode that he's standing on the ground plane, and we're pretty much good there. Alright, and the very last thing now is to put coding on the character. So now we have a sprite that's in our scene. We have the walking and animations incorporated. We have the collision added to the ground plane and the character. So let's go add coding. Now that we've already imported Playmaker and all the other Playmaker coding assets, I'm going to go click on the main character, so he's selected, and then add component. And down at the bottom we have Playmaker. And I'm going to use Playmaker FSM, which stands for Finite State Machine. GUI is Graphical User Interface. We're not doing a GUI right now, so we're going to use the FSM. So I click on the FSM, and it puts a Playmaker component on our character right now. So we have character and all the other things. We have the sprite render. Also of note, for the sprite render, if you try and move the character around, you can move them around like so. But if you minimize the sprite render, actually it still works in this one. In Unity 4.5 that I was using, when you minimize this, you lost the ability to slide them on the screen, so that was kind of tricky. But if you left it open, you'd have that option. Anyway, so aside from that, I'm going to call this FSM walking, because this will be the walking state. Or I can call it movement. Let's go with movement. Alright, and then if I click edit, I now have the Playmaker option. So I'm going to put this window inside here, and that's where it was earlier. That's why this says file failed to load, because the Playmaker wasn't imported on this new scene. So I'm going to remove that tab. So here's Playmaker. Alright, so now in Playmaker we have the movement name that we've named it right here, but you can also name it by clicking on the FSM and putting movement down there. The state right here is referring to the different states that we're going to have, and the events, we have to make events to make transitions, and variables are different variables we're going to use. Alright, so under state, I'm going to click on the first state, and we need to, actually, let me make some events first. If I try and use add transition, I'm only going to get one option finished besides the system and network events. So if I go to events, I can make, let's say, flip right and flip left. And so this will flip different directions. So now if I right click add transition, we'll have flip left, right click add transition, flip right. And so I have flip left and flip right. So I have different states, and I can right click add a new state. I should probably name the first one. So I'm going to click on state 1, and under the state tab I'm going to call this one, let's call it not which direction, let's just call it standing. Alright, so he's standing still in this state. This is going to be flip left, and we'll make one more, add state. This one we'll call flip right. So now we can flip his sprite left and right. So I got flip left and flip right. And if I take the flip left, I can click and drag to the flip left and click right to right. So now for our sprite, he's going to start in the standing position. And since I've created an event that says flip left, he'll go left and turn left, and he'll go right and turn right. So we have our different code options. We don't have any code on him yet. This is just creating the state to hold him. All right, so the first thing we need to do is add, if we go to the action browser right here, under the standing state, we click on action browser, and it pulls up another tab. And this is the other tab that I had right here. So I'm going to close out this one. So now I have actions. And you can rearrange the screen however you want. But the Playmaker, the actions, and the hierarchy and project. All right, so for actions, we have a whole bunch of different actions that are listed here. I'm going to go pull up, and you can type this, which makes it a little bit quicker. Get axis, and it gives you the option. I can double click it or drag it into the window. So if I double click it, it pops in here. And so we're going to use get axis, and I'm going to grab the horizontal. And you want to use a capital H because it is letter case sensitive when you're doing the code. Even though it's not line by line code, it still is letter sensitive. All right, so horizontal, and I'm going to multiply the horizontal axis by 2.5. This will increase his speed a little bit, and I'm going to store this, and I don't have a variable yet, so it says none. So I need to create a variable, and I'm going to call this x speed. And since we're creating our own variable, we can call it whatever we want, so you don't have to use the same name as me. And this one will be a float. There's lots of different options, but for right now, we're going to go with float. So I'm going to press add, and it creates an x speed float variable. Float means it can be any decimal place number, so it's not a specific like 1, 2, 3. It could be 1.75 or whatever. All right, so back to the state. Now we can store this x speed as the variable. So we have the horizontal axis that will calculate and grab his motion, multiply it by 2.5 to increase his speed, and store that as his x speed. We'll do that every frame. So every 30th of a second, it'll redo this again, so it can detect whether he's moving or not moving. All right, and we're also going to grab action browser, which is still sitting right here. We're going to do set velocity, and we're going to use the physics 2D, not the physics. So I'm going to take the physics 2D and drag that in here. And since we have the game object is the owner, since we're putting the code on the character, you can see there's a code icon, meaning that he has code on him. And then we're going to grab the x speed and set that, or the x direction, and set it to x speed. So it's going to set his velocity. So it's going to get the motion. So it's going to grab the horizontal motion times 2.5 and save it as x speed, and then it's going to use the saved x speed on the x value. So it's going to set his velocity, meaning set his motion that he's going to be moving at 2.5 in the horizontal direction. So we're creating a variable, putting a number in, and then setting that number. And we're going to do that every frame as well. All right, and then one more thing, or a bunch more things, but action browser, we're going to get key down. I'm going to drag get key down in here. So for the key, I'm going to click on, as you can see, a whole lot of keys here. I'm going to click this down arrow and hold until I get to the right arrow. Or I could do left arrow first, either option. I guess I'll do left. So if I press the key left and I go send event, because I've already created these two events under the event tab, I'm going to click flip left. You wouldn't otherwise see these if you hadn't made an event, and if you don't have them and reveal them the transitions by right-clicking and adding transition, then it'll give you a red warning saying it's not currently used. And we don't need to store the result. We just need to say that when you press the left key, go to the left event. And we're going to do this again. I can either drag it in or I can press copy. So I'm going to copy. So copy selected and paste actions. So now I have a copy. I'm going to change the left arrow to the right arrow, and change flip left to flip right. So now I have, when you press the keyboard button left, he'll go to flip left, and if you press the keyboard right, he'll flip right. And you can change this instead of using right arrow to something like, I just lost it. You could use your ASDW or AWSD if you wanted to code it that direction. But I'm going to use the arrow keys. And this was probably right. Yep, right arrow. All right, so now we have the flip left and flip right. We're also going to need a few other options to do the flipping. But for now, let's just see what happens. So he'll drop down when it starts, and if I press the right key, he goes to the flip right state, but now he's kind of stuck there because we haven't sent it back yet, and he hasn't started moving yet either. So let's pause that. We're also going to need to add a transition finished. When this state is finished, you can see it's saying it doesn't have a direction yet. So let's click and drag that back to standing. And the same thing, add transition finished, drag that back. So in this case, when it's flipped the sprite, it'll move, it'll put that back there, and send it back there, and we won't need that just yet. So the next step would be, all right, so let's go and try and, I guess, get the animation. Oh, yeah, wait. All right, so let's try this again. We'll press the play button. And all right, so now I move. So now that we have the finished states in there, he'll slide left and right when he plays. All right, but he doesn't turn around yet. So we're going to do the flip states now. So if I go over to flip left and flip right, I'm going to go Action Browser, and we're going to go Set Scale. And I'm going to grab Set Scale right here, drag that in there. And for the X scale, when he's flipping left, he's going to be turning backwards. So we need to set this from, and if you click the word none, it gives you a preset variable list. But if you click this right icon next to it, it gives you the option to type something in. So I'm going to set -1 for when he flips left. And I don't need to do every frame, I just need to do it once. And as soon as it does that, it'll send it back to finished, back to the character. And now flip right, same thing, Action Browser, Set Scale, and X needs to be set back to 1 now, so we can revert back. So now if I press play, he moves left and he turns and goes right, or vice versa. Alright, so now we just have to incorporate the walking animation into here. Alright, so let's press pause on that, jump back to standing, and in order to incorporate the animation, if I jump over to the animator and create make transition back to here, right click, make transition back up to here, and press play, you can see that he's walking and idling and walking and idling, and he's going to do that whether I'm pressing the key or not. So now we need to create an option for him to do that. In order to do that, we're going to go to parameters over here, not the layers panel, but the parameters. In Unity 4, there's an option down here. You just click parameters and the plus sign down here, but Unity 5 puts a new window up right here. So we're going to go to parameters. I'm going to create a new, actually searching for a new name. I'm going to click plus, and I'm going to make a float. Integer is going to be a non-decimal place, and float is decimal place. Bool and trigger we'll cover later. All right, so float, I'm going to call this, I'll go h speed. So it's this horizontal speed. And we're going to say the idle position, and click on this little transition, this blue line right here, the blue transition. Right now it has exit time. So when it finishes the animation, the 1 second it's playing, on exit time it'll transition to the next. I don't want it to transition on exit time, so I need to uncheck that. In Unity 4, there wasn't the box there, it automatically dropped it in the conditions for you. So that's the difference between 4 and 5. So in 5, we're going to uncheck that. We don't want to use exit time. We want to use conditions and add the plus sign right here. And it drops in the only parameter we have right now is h-speed. And it's going to say h-speed is greater than, and I'm going to say 0.1. So when its horizontal speed is greater than 0.1, then that must mean he's walking. So that's the condition is met. So now he's walking. And then we click on the arrow back and say the same thing. We don't care about the exit time. It doesn't need to finish playing the sprite. We're going to go to conditions, and we're going to say when the h speed is less than 0.1, that means he must not be walking because it's less than 0.1. He's almost stopped. So then transition back to idle. So if I press play, nothing's going to happen yet because we haven't defined what the h-speed is. We've created a parameter called h-speed, but the game doesn't know what an h-speed is. It's just a set of letters we typed in. So I'm going to go back to the character so we can pull up the coding again. And I need to tell the h-speed what it is. And I'm going to tell the h-speed that it equals x-speed. But this x-speed is a variable right here in our FSM, and it's not the same as an animator parameter. So the variable and parameter are different. We need to tell them that they need to use the same number though. So jumping back to the state, I'm going to go and add in a set float value and drop that in the bottom. And we're going to set the float variable. The float variable should be, actually we need to make one first. Variable, I'm going to call this the parameter speed, so I can know that this is the transition between the two. Jump back to state. I'm going to set this as the parameter speed, and the float value is based on the x speed. So it's going to take the x speed, and that's our value. The value is whatever x happens to be at that moment, however fast he's going. Could be 1, could be 2, could be 7.5, whatever it is. So it's going to take that value and save it as a parameter speed now. And again, the parameter speed is not the same as the parameter. So, and the reason is, and we won't do this every frame, pull up the action browser and let's do set animator float. Alright, set animator float. This one is this one. So the animator tab, which is animator right here, which is why we added in the beginning our animator options, we have the float animator. We'll drop this in here. And the parameter, so now it asks us what is the parameter, and this is the parameter. And it's letter for letter exactly the way you spelled it there. So make sure you have a capital and an underscore and a speed. If you're using the same naming, you can call it whatever you want, but the exact same way you named it here has to be right here because it reads that as the code. And the value is, and now here's where we could say x speed, and if I do x speed, and I want to do this every frame so it's constantly updating, and if I were to press play and go forward, it doesn't work on the backwards. And the reason it doesn't work in the backwards is because this is saying if it's greater than 0.1 or less than 0.1, but it never accounts for negative. And our x speed is negative, which is why he's flipping. So he has a negative x speed when he's going this way and a positive x speed this way. Actually, the speed isn't changing the flipping, it's just the direction that you click on the keyboard. But he has a negative x speed as he's moving this direction. So that's why we have this right here. We're going to make a parameter speed based on the x speed and add one more thing, our last bit of code, float absolute. So I'm going to drop this in here. So the float absolute will take the absolute value parameter speed. The reason we don't want to use the absolute of the x speed and then say, sure, you use the x speed now, is because it'll still be the negative number. So we need to set that parameter speed. So what happens here is a quick review. We have the horizontal direction is times 2.5 and saved as x speed. So whatever number that is at the moment is what's going to add here. So this is what's going to set his velocity in motion. So it's going to start moving by the x speed times 2.5. It's going to flip his directions based on the arrow keys, and then we're going to take the x speed and we're going to save it as a new parameter, a new variable that we can use in absolute value, because we don't want absolute value or x speed, or else he won't be able to move left. He'll always constantly be moving right because he can't have a negative. So he needs to have a negative, so we need a new number. So that's why our parameter, we take parameter speed, absolute value that, we'll do that every frame. So parameter speed, x speed, every frame. Then the parameter speed is every frame as well, and we're going to make the h speed, which is our animation, equal to our parameter speed, which is an absolute value. Set it to every frame, and we should be done. Press play. And the character drops in. You can gravity drops him to the collision box. If I press the right arrow, he moves forward and walks. If I press left, he moves left and walks, and he moves left and right. You may also notice there's a slight pause between if I flip left and right real quick, he slides on the ground with his feet just standing still. The reason that's occurring, that's a minor little glitch we can work out. If I pause this and go to the transition, there's this blue area right here where it's overlapping. If we go to settings, and Unity 4 doesn't have this option, so it's already fixed, but 5 has this option, which is why it's having this little glitch. We're going to set the transition duration to 0, so it's not overlapping the transition, and it basically takes out that blue overlap. The frames are still overlapping between idle and walking, so it's automatically going to transition it, but it won't have that pause where it's waiting. So you can play around with these numbers and see how that works. I'm going to click on the transition back and again set that transition to 0, so it'll immediately jump right to it. This is, I guess, kind of like blurring your frames together, but without it on there, now he'll immediately walk left and right, and if I keep switching back and forth left and right, he's going to constantly immediately start re-walking the other direction without having that little pause of just sliding his feet back and forth. Alright, and that about covers how to do this. So one last quick review. We have the animator, which covers all the programming, the animations in there. The animations themselves we've brought in here. We have the scene where we dropped everything in here. We have the object ground that has the collision plane. We have the character who has collision on him as well, and we have the code, which is all Playmaker, and it's already added to here. So if I press pause, click on the character again, we have our start code. I can probably change the word standing to movement, so it corresponds to the name of this. So we have our movement, flip left, flip right, and our different states. Alright, and so the next video we're going to cover how to get the character to jump.